Hi, I'm Mitch, and I overcame depression through LSD and peyote. So I had depression from a very young age. Pretty much as long as I can remember. It's hard to give like a really defining point because I think with like retrospect, it's easy to to change some of the details of what was happening for me at a very young age. But from probably the time I was 2 or 3, I would say not that I had depression, but I had certain things that I was working out, certain things that happened to me that really impacted my ability to understand the world or like affection with people or things like that. And then I would say when I was about 5 or 6 was when I feel like I started having depression. And I'm not sure if that's just me manipulating the details in my head or if it was that age. And then I definitely had a defining moment in year two, year three, no, year two. I had a defining moment in year two where I can describe the situation. It was purely just like a coincidental situation. I was in the classroom and my teacher thought they heard me say something which I didn't even say. They thought I said like everyone in the world hates me or something like that, or everyone hates me. And she like turned to me and like paused everything, like paused the class, like told everyone like shh, be quiet, and like sort of looked at me and said did you say what I think you said? Because I care about you. And I had this moment of like fear, realizing that I didn't feel at that time a lot of love in my life, and I loved this feeling of of people caring about me, and this was all at that age. It's not a conscious thing, or at any age, that's not a conscious realization or decision, but it kind of set me on this path of subconsciously thinking that I could feel love by being depressed or by drawing attention to the pain that I was going through. So that's, I'd say, is like the defining moment for me, where like from that moment on I was 100% depressed. I mean, I'm sure over the course of let's say about a month I probably dove into that world, and then from then on I never really came out for a long time. So, oh, and I will also just qualify that like I do have very loving parents, and I think I had some difficulties with them growing up, but a lot of it was like my interpretation of the world at that age, and and I have a really good relationship with my parents now. That like that's important to me. That like I think they always loved me, and I didn't always see that. Um, so yeah, from about that age onwards, just I would always subconsciously do these things to like. It's hard to describe probably to someone who hasn't been in depression, because depression feels awful, but I wanted to be depressed, sort of, because again, like this subconscious thing, I wanted people to realize I was in pain. Um, and then I can probably skip through quite a few years. Like I think I'd say like when I was in late primary school, like I sort of developed more of the idea of suicide. Having said that, I did have like one time when I was quite young. I must have been in about year 2 or 3 when I had like I did have a plan to commit suicide, and it was very much an ineffective ideology. I think one thing, me being so young, and another thing just being that part of me probably wasn't ready. Well, I'm not sure if that's true. Maybe I was ready, but I was certainly too young, I think, to execute anything. And so, like essentially, like it was a time when we had a babysit around, and I planned that I was going to use like our family sword to like stab myself and kill myself. And I, yeah, I started trying to carry out this plan, and essentially like was trying to get the sword out of a cupboard, and the babysitter was coming into the next room, and I freaked out and left. But yeah, I think the suicide ideation really started to set in probably in early high school or very late primary school. I had a lot of like follow-on impacts, I think, from depression and from this ideology of, like how to get love from people. So there were times in my life when I tried to like starve myself. Like very briefly, I would try and throw up my food. Self-harm. And then I think in about year 9, I really kind of like, I was really unwell. There were periods where I saw things, like when I was imagine things when I was walking down the street. I would see people following me, and it's hard to describe it. Like I would see people following me, and they felt dangerous, and I knew somewhere in my mind that it wouldn't be real, but like it still kind of felt real. And this whole time I sort of had this attraction to being unwell, and I think as well as giving other people a reason to love me, it gave myself a reason to love myself, or to have excuses for the way I felt, or have excuses for like fucking up, in everyday situations. Cause I could point to my depression and be like, this is what made me be like this. Like I had a lot of difficulty with my family at that age, where essentially they just found me to be a very difficult person and a very argumentative person. Like they made that abundantly clear. And again, I could kind of point to my depression and be like, this is why you're like this, that kind of thing. So I went down a sidetrack there, but so I was quite unwell in about year 9. And I'm trying to think what other things, because there were quite a few things going on that like at some point I realized that I was actually kind of like, it was beyond just the depression I knew up until that stage. It was like I felt like I was at a serious risk of kind of psychosis or something like that. So I started to reach out to people for help. And I think I didn't have a lot of friends at that stage. I'd say throughout primary school and early high school. And then by about year 9, probably because of, a lot of the stuff that was going on inside my head, I just became less of a sociable person, very awkward, not very able to like interact with people. And I didn't have a lot of people. And so I did reach out to people. And I had a mixed experience with that. Like, I think certainly the few people who I reached out to, did show love and like wanted to help me, and they talked to a school counselor, which I know for a lot of people that's actually a really tough thing, because they're trusting their friend not to do that. But for me, like, I was just amazed that they would even like, think to do that. And then at the same time, like, I think I still wasn't as close to all of these people as I wanted to be. And it felt a little bit isolating as well, because it was kind of like they were the only people I could reach out to because they were the closest people to me. But the way it felt was that like I wasn't actually much of a part of their lives, if that makes sense. And I also had a couple of bad experiences with school counselors. So after they talked to a school counselor, I started talking to school counselors, and they would essentially tell my parents a lot of the things that I said, which they weren't meant to. Like, I know that there are certain things that they have to, but like it might, for example, be like, oh, I was upset with this situation with a friend, and then my parents would hear about it, and I'd be like, where did you hear about this from? So I had a few bad experiences, and also I always constantly talking to the school counselors I had the feeling that they thought I was making things up to get attention, which possibly isn't strictly untrue, given like, the ideology I've described to you is like I wanted love, and that's subconsciously how I get love, and that does go a bit hand in hand with this trying to get attention. But at the same time, like all of my symptoms were real. My depression was real. My wanting to commit suicide was real. The pain I was going through was real. And it felt like the way they saw me was like a kid who is trying to get a quick, fix of attention, and that's all. They told my parents that I wasn't at any risk, even though I was, severely self-harming and genuinely suicidal. I never made like a very effective, genuine attempt, but certainly like the ideology was very strong in my mind. And yeah, I would, they told my parents that I wasn't really at any risk of harm, and my parents told me that, and it just didn't feel right. So then coming out of high school, I think I went through a good patch simply because I got a girlfriend who I had a really good relationship with for at least a few years. And for the first time in my life, that was kind of like a source of validation. It was like, it was possible that there was one person in the world that didn't like hate me. And then, so I did have like probably a couple of years where I was much healthier, and I worked through a lot of, like, I stopped seeing imaginary things. I stopped, doing sort of trying not to eat, all those sorts of things. But I mean, I guess the foundation for that healthier time of my life, was pretty shaky because it relied on this relationship. And so then when that relationship fell through, that was devastating to me. And I guess that was extremely devastating because, as I said, it was like this, it was almost, rather than the relationship itself that was devastating, it was devastating that I thought I'd found a way to prove that like I could be loved by like one person in the world, or that I could have any sort of value, and like that idea shattered. And also, this ex-girlfriend of mine, I felt, really broke my trust and like made me feel like potentially a lot of what the validation I'd received wasn't actually real. So that brings me, I guess, into university years. I think throughout university years, and also to back of high school, I learned to occupy myself with things, as a way of not having to think about depression and not having to think about myself and how much I hated myself. So I learned to work. I worked in a bakery in late high school. I would work 3 a.m. till like 7 a.m. I would go to school. I would come home. I would study. I would just exhaust myself, and I would be literally too tired to be depressed. And I kind of carried that through university a bit. And then I think throughout university, I started to get a bit healthier. I think I no longer had a suicidal ideation, probably, except for when things were really bad. So what I mean by that is like throughout my life, I would have been suicidal every single day of the week. Like it's just not something that fluctuated or paused. I had this one time I remember in like year 8 when it was sort of another defining moment where I realized kind of how depressed I was. When we had this this class, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was called, actually I won't say the name because it might be identifying. So I had this class in high school that kind of delved into a whole lot of different like theories of like dreams and all sorts of other things. And one part of it, the teacher was saying like, I think he was jesting around, I can't remember exactly, but he was saying like, it's a fact that like every single person, when they daydream, like at some point sees themselves as a hero in their situation. And I remember just like being like, wait, what are you talking about? Like the only thing that I've ever daydreamed about constantly throughout my day is just dying. Like every time I'm in a different classroom, at some point my mind is wandering to like ways that I can kill myself. And that's just how my day was every single day. And so I'd say in my university years, at this stage, suicide was something that fluctuated in and out. And if I was having a really bad time and a really hard time to myself, then I would have suicidal thoughts. but I could go day to day, not always having those thoughts intruding every single thing I did. Now, I guess that pretty much takes me through to this year. I'm about 2 years out of university, and so in February, I had this amazing experience that actually cured my depression. So it's not something that I had planned at all. I kind of got into experimenting with different drugs as like a creative thing. Like it was something that amazed me, in particular psychedelics. I was interested essentially in like any type of way of thinking that was different to the way that the brain normally thinks. But psychedelics is the one that like really just jumped out at me, because when I tried LSD this one time, I actually had a terrible trip the first time I tried it, but it was still amazing in many other ways. I saw like the sun rising and setting in 5-second cycles outside. I saw myself in like infinite dimensions doing different things in all of those dimensions. I saw like the ceiling like fell over my head, and like the floor fell away, and like the room kind of around me changed over and over and over again. And I saw these things that like really amazed me and made me just have this overwhelming sense of like, there are experiences that people have had out there that I haven't, because like my brain hasn't perceived things in this way, and that was really interesting to me. So at some point, I came across the drug peyote, or when I say the drug, it's a plant, so a cactus. It's big in like South America. I believe it's used in a lot of like sort of spiritual settings. And I came across this after I'd tried LSD, I'd tried mushrooms, I'd tried a couple of other things, but I came across peyote, and essentially you boil it into a tea. Like you have a cactus, you chop it up, you blend it, you make it into a tea. So yeah, I was pretty excited to try this peyote. It was like this new experience, this new thing that I was going to find out what it's like. And the process for boiling it took like about 8 hours. And essentially by the time I got to having the tea, I had like a lot of anticipation about it, and I was really excited to have this new experience. And I took the tea and waited for about an hour, which was generally how long I wait on LSD or other psychedelics, until I can really start to feel something coming on, at least feel some effects. Maybe it's like a feeling of like adrenaline, or maybe, I don't know if adrenaline's the right chemical, but a feeling of something. Or maybe it's like, visual distortions, things start to wave. But essentially that was my benchmark. And what I've realized since then is like I'd kind of forgotten a couple of the readings which say you should probably wait even up to 2 hours. But I waited about 1 hour, wasn't feeling anything, wasn't feeling this sense of time distortion where like time slows down that you usually get with many psychedelics. And I kind of thought to myself, like, look, you cooked up some cactus from a plant in your own yard and you're not feeling anything. Like, no surprise, you probably did it wrong. Maybe burned the mescaline, which is the chemical compound that's psychoactive. Who knows? Maybe you bought it off someone that didn't actually sell you a legitimate plant. And because of that, and because of all the anticipation I'd had leading up, I was determined to have kind of a new experience. And so I was trying to rack my brain for like, what could I do instead to use this time? I'd set aside the time to trip, which for peyote can be up to like 12 hours. So I had 12 hours spare. So what I settled on was I wanted to try LSD with my eyes closed for the entire time. So LSD generally lasts about, I think, 7 to 9 hours. And you get a lot of visual hallucinations, and they're very different when your eyes are closed compared to when your eyes are open. When your eyes are open, everything, in my experiences, unless you have a very high dose, everything is very anchored to real things around you. So like I might see a bookshelf, and it might start to waver. I might see a person in an extreme circumstance, that person might start melting, or like as I described before, the room might fall away. But it's always the actual room that I'm in. It's always the real bookshelf that's there, or the real person that's there. There's like these anchors to the real life things that you're seeing. When I close my eyes on LSD, I just get like wild, vivid hallucinations of just anything. So like one time I saw this water fountain, and elephants started spurting out of the like water nozzles, and then like the scenery fell away and I was in the mountains and I could feel the sun burning my shoulders even though I was inside, and I could feel the snow falling down on me, and I could see these trees starting to grow around. So like just wild hallucinations in your head. And they can be quite intense. It can be very draining. So often like you can close your eyes for just 30 seconds and you already feel like that's too much. Like I'm just, I don't know how to interpret everything that's happening, and it's very intense. But I wanted to set out for full trip and not open my eyes. So I started doing that. I took 2 tabs of acid, which were 120 micrograms each, so about 240 micrograms of acid, LSD. And I waited for a bit, things started to come on. I started seeing like fractals in my head, and like I was dancing in the fractals and just sort of meaningless things. And then eventually I started losing my sense of like self and space, like where I was relative to space around me. So I was lying in my bed, but I couldn't tell if I was facing up or down. I couldn't tell if like my hands were like up like this or down like this. I just felt like this huge disconnect from my body. And then like as time went on, like the hallucinations were getting more vivid. After a while, my eyes were really starting to strain. And my brain, like my LSD affected brain, kind of couldn't fully comprehend what it was that was straining. So like there were a few things my brain knew. I knew that I'd set out to do something, which was to keep my eyes shut for the whole trip, but I couldn't remember that's what it was. I just remembered I'd set out to do something. And I remembered, my muscle memory remembered to keep my eyes shut, but consciously I wasn't remembering that. And then I had this kind of, very conscious sensation that my eyes were straining, and that, like, I guess I gave myself this delusion that whatever I had come to find, whatever I'd like set out to complete, like completing that would release whatever that strain was. So I'm not sure exactly how my brain got to that point, but somehow my LSD affected brain just like connected these dots of things it knew, and like I just set out on this track of like, all right, I'm in a lot of pain actually. I'm really uncomfortable, and I need to find that thing really quickly so that I can release that strain. And so this was purely just like an accidental thing. Like it's not something that I set out to do. I had no like, some people experiment with psychedelics with a lot of positive intention. Like they come in with knowing what they want to find, or at least knowing a range of things they want to explore and being open to like finding something among them. And for me, like I was literally just like a stoner kid being like, oh, I want to see some cool shit with my eyes shut. I had no intention of setting down this path, but my brain ended up on this path, and I was just frantically in my mind going, all right, what did you come here to find? You need to find that. Like, what could it be? And from there, I started just asking myself tons and tons of questions. So first, I think was something like, am I comfortable with my sexuality? And it's not that I've ever been uncomfortable with my sexuality. It's not that that had been something that had been bugging me. It's just like, it was just a question I asked myself. And I think I've talked to another friend who on peyote, the cactus tea, asked themselves the same questions, and they would also say it's not something that had been bugging them or anything like that. But my brain just asked myself these questions, and I was asking myself really critically, like, think about it. Like, don't just say, yes, I'm comfortable with it. Say to yourself, like, if I was the only person in the universe from the time I was born, like, would I be the exact same sexuality and expression of sexuality and those sorts of things as I am now? And if not, why is the difference? Like, obviously it's something to do with the pressures of people around or whatever it could be. But trying to like challenge myself to really figure out those questions. Or like another question might be like, am I comfortable not just in my sexuality, but in the way that other people perceive my sexuality? Because I know that some people see me as being like quite feminine. And at the moment I do dress very colorfully compared to what I did back then. It's not like that, but sometimes, I think, just the way that I speak to people or something, like some people do see me as more feminine. And that was something that, again, I was like, even if you know exactly what your sexuality, gender, your expression of those things are, like how comfortable are you with the way that other people see it? And if you're not fully comfortable, why not like really try to make myself think about those things? And so eventually just like mulling over these questions and answering them to myself, I got to a point of satisfaction, like just kind of content. I was like, I've asked myself all these questions and I'm happy with the answers. And probably felt very freeing as well, just like, coming to terms with any minor discomfort in myself and like really, sorting through that. And so when I got to a point of satisfaction or contentment with that, I was still feeling this strain of, again, didn't realize it, but of my eyes clenching. I was still feeling this strain. I was still seeing crazy psychedelic visuals. It was feeling very intense. And I was like, okay, you didn't find what you came here to find. You need to keep searching because you need to relieve that pressure. And I asked myself a lot of questions about guilt and shame and things like that. Like a lot of things. I think I had a strong tendency throughout my life to feel a lot of guilt and shame for everything. I think that was a huge part of my depression. And I think it started probably with my rocky relationship with my family when I was younger. I just had this constant, immense sense of guilt about everything. Like whether it could be like, oh, I said something to this person that I wish I hadn't said, or it could just be like, oh, like I looked awkward in this situation, or like, I should have done this quicker, or like, it could be anything. And then like my mind would just go like, I fucking hate myself. I fucking hate myself. Like, why would you do this? Why would you do that? And I just constantly had this immense sense of guilt and shame. So I was starting to ask myself about these sorts of things. And also some things at that time that, probably were, reasonable reasons to feel guilt and shame, but it's still like unpacking them and being like, like what is the positive, constructive purpose of that guilt and shame? Or have you, in those situations that I feel guilty or ashamed about, like how is my current person, like, I don't know, handling these types of situations in the world now? Like, have I tried to make as much of a positive difference to those situations as I can? Have I tried to work on myself to stop getting myself in those situations as much as I can? And overwhelmingly, like the answer to those questions was yes. Like that's something that I've always cared about, is like the impact I have on other people and trying to improve the impact that I have on other people's lives. And so I could pretty honestly say for all of these situations, like, yes, like this is something that I've worked really hard on. And then again, like being really critical with myself. So like, then why do you feel these ways with guilt and shame? And if you would forgive someone else for doing this thing, like another example is just like saying something really spontaneous and then feeling a bit silly about it later. Like, would you forgive someone for doing that? Like, of course I would. And so why don't you forgive yourself for that? And like really unpacking that and trying to understand that. And I think spontaneity was a big one. Like I'm the kind of person that will very easily just do something silly on a night out, or like, send a text really impulsively. And this was actually a huge one for me during this trip. Something I realized was I very often impulsively send out like a message to people or say something to people that I later worry could be, I don't know, like maybe intrusive or condescending or something like that. So if I give an example, like I had once heard about this person who'd been through like some really horrible things. And it set me off on this bit of like this, I don't know, this discomfort in my body, just being like, oh, I really hope that the people in my life, know that they have a safe place if they go through these things. And I sent out a message to a couple of my friends just saying, like, if you ever need a place to stay, like, please let me know. You can stay here. Like, there'll be food, there'll be a place to sleep. Like, my house is always open. And I'd send that when I'd been, I think probably on LSD another time, or maybe something else, I don't know. But like, I'd send it out impulsively. I hadn't really been thinking, and I woke up the next morning and read these like lengthy messages that I'd sent, and realized like that's just not something that you should do impulsively. It probably made people feel a bit uncomfortable, potentially. Like it, could have come across as condescending, like, oh, you have a place where I can come and stay. I don't know if it came across that way, but that's a possibility. And so again, this is the kind of situation where I'd wake up next morning and be like, I fucking hate myself. Like, why the fuck would you do that? Why would you send that out? And I was mulling this over on this trip and kind of came to the realization that, like, I think the question I asked myself was like, if you hate that so much about yourself, why haven't you changed it? Like, why haven't you been able to like stop yourself from that impulsivity? And because, as I said, I have worked on myself in a lot of other ways, where I feel like I might be impacting people. So because I often work on those things, like, why haven't I managed to change this thing that I really hated about myself? And at some point unpacking that, I realized like the reason is because I ended up in these situations where I really care about someone or about people in general. And I care so much that I don't think. Like, I just, I just go into like reflex response. And I'm just like, bang, bang, bang. Like, this is how I want to, like safeguard these people in my life, or these people who I've seen in this situation. And like, I'm not saying that that's not something I would want to, work on, as in like, if I am going to make people feel uncomfortable, if I'm going to be intrusive, if I'm going to be condescending, that's still something I want to work on. But it was still this like weird realization for me, that I really liked that I was caring towards people. And so for me, for someone who's like never a day in my life liked something about myself, I mean, if someone has depression, I think it's very likely they can relate to this. If they haven't, I'm not sure if they can, but it's like, there is no part of me that I ever liked. Like, every single aspect of myself I hated. Like, I remember when I was probably about 5 or 6, around 5 or 6 was when I started to have like a lot of existential feelings. And I think that's why I potentially feel like I had depression from that age. I had these existential feelings where I started to like, I think the first thing was like, as a child, I started to learn that like my color of skin was not as good as other people's color of skin in the town I was living. And I learned this actually first from my parents. I think not intentionally, obviously, they every good intention, but they kind of mentioned to us like, growing up, we faced this sort of racism. We got called these names, like that's something that will happen to you. And then that's kind of the message I got, was like, I'm going to get called these names, and like, that's it. And then kids, sure enough, did start calling me names. I've had everything. I've had like the N-word, because I think my town probably saw me as very, very dark. I've had blackie, black coal, black shit, brown shit, like everything. And I started to like really kind of despise my own skin color. And I remember having this like existential crisis of, at that age, I believed in God. I'd been raised sort of semi-Christian. And I had this moment of like realizing, like, I don't think it's possible for there to be a God, because if there was a God, like, he wouldn't have made me like this. Anyway, so that was a long sidetrack, but the point I'm getting at is like, for me, in the depression that I had throughout my life, there was no part of me, like physical, mental, emotional, anything that I liked about myself. And I came to this moment and realized I really like that I care about people. Like, that's something that I really like. And in fact, my LSD affected brain was able to say that's something I love about myself. So that went on. I pondered a range of other questions. I kept really like getting into the nitty gritty, like breaking them down, trying like ask myself really challenging questions, and getting to a point of comfort, of like contentment and like satisfaction sort of. And at some point my visuals, which this whole time had been really psychedelic and really like, like visual hallucinations. I can't actually remember exactly what, but just vivid pictures. At some point my vision just went blank white, and I just kind of like sat back and went like, this is really weird. I've never had this on LSD. I don't know how to interpret it. I was really worried at this stage that like that thing I'd been setting out to find, if I relieved that pressure, I think I kind of knew in my brain how to do it, even though I didn't realize it was my eyes. I think my brain knew how to do it. And I was like, if I do relieve the pressure, what if I came so close to finding the thing I had to find, went through all this like pain and all these questions, and then like just missed the mark. But eventually I like convinced myself, look, you keep on seeing blank white. You've run out of questions. I can't think of anything else to ask myself. I think you found what you came to find. So at that point I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was the corner of my bedroom. I had these plant tiles up, and like my eyesight just caught a glimpse of them, and they just exploded out towards me. And it was kind of like, the only way I can think to describe it is it felt like I was watching the Big Bang or something. Like this, like galaxies kind of exploding towards me, and images just started rushing towards me, which is something I've never come close to on LSD. It was a really just crazy experience. These images just rushing past, and then I kind of like instantly lost my memory and sense of self in a way, like, or at least connection to my physical body. So I couldn't remember any of the things I just asked myself or processed. I completely forgot like my own name. I opened my eyes were open, and like everything was kind of really glowing white around me in my bedroom. And I had this sensation that I needed to like do something bodily, as in like have a drink of water or have a piss or something. But like I couldn't figure out what it was. Like that's how kind of out of touch with my body was. And I would keep like sitting up in my bed to like go get some water, and then be like, no, that's not it. Lie back down, sit back up to go have a piss. No, that's not it. And yeah, I was just really out of touch with myself. This went on for ages, and then I started getting this incredible kind of positive feeling. And because I was so out of touch with myself, I couldn't place what it was. Like I was just so confused. Something felt really good and I didn't know what. And I mulled it over and over and over. And then at some point realized that it was like a relief that I'd opened my eyes, like this muscle strain that I'd had this whole time, like finally releasing that. It was like my muscles were just like relaxed. But I sat on that feeling for a while, and like I started to just feel like, no, that's not fully it. Like that is it, but like the feeling's kind of something more than that. And at some point, like I kind of realized that the relief I was feeling was beyond just the muscle strain. I was feeling this immense sense of relief from having processed all these things, from having just like accepted so many things about myself, even sexuality, which I think I'd already accepted about myself, but still just coming to like full acceptance with it. Shame, guilt, those big ones. And then like biggest of all, just like having love for something about myself. And I had this immense sense of relief. And at this stage, I actually started to try and message a couple of my friends, my brother and one of my friends, just saying like, I don't know what's happening. I'm confused. I can't talk, but like something amazing just happened. Like I can't explain it, but like something incredible just happened. And then like I got this feeling that like I wasn't depressed anymore. Like the thought just entered my head, like you're not depressed anymore. Which is strange because I was on LSD and I had euphoria from the LSD, and it should be, I would say, fairly indistinguishable in some ways, because like in the past, no matter how depressed I've been, I can take LSD and I can feel euphoric. But I had this light bulb moment. It was like, I don't know, light just like switched off, if the light is my depression. Like a light just kind of switched off, and I just felt like I wasn't depressed anymore. And I had a couple of moments of like hesitancy where I was like, I don't know if I want to make such a big claim and then wake up 3 weeks from now and like feel, devastated that that wasn't correct. And then I remember thinking that to myself, and then I had this inner monologue just saying like, actually, no, like my depression is over and I'm going to make sure it is. Like I get to decide this. And I think the sentence that really came to my mind was like, I am so sick of being depressed. Like I've been depressed for so long. I'm getting emotional now. From let's say the age of 5 when I was really getting existential, and having, losing love for myself to the age of, at this stage I was 23. So that's like 18 years that I literally for 18 years hated everything about myself and didn't enjoy the world around me. And I just said to myself, like, I'm so sick of feeling depressed. I've been depressed for so long and I'm just sick of feeling that. It's like, I'm gonna, like, I don't care if this is like a volatile situation that might not last, I'm gonna make it last. And actually one interesting thing that I've read since then, or maybe heard in a podcast, I've actually heard that that's a really common thing that people experience on psychedelics, not just with mental illness, but also with addictions. I've heard of people having these light bulb moments where they say, I can choose not to have cigarettes or heroin or whatever else it is that they've been addicted to for so long. And it seems crazy because there's chemical dependency and they've tried to quit millions of times, but they have this moment where they just, say, actually, I get to choose this. And that's definitely the experience I had. So that was in February, and that was February of this year. Now we're in, October? November. We're in November. Organization isn't my strong suit. So it's been like 9 months. For the first month, I would wake up every single morning and just be ecstatic with life, like just bursting with love for myself and like bursting with love for the day. Like I would just like walk out into the sun every morning and be like, oh my God, the world is so beautiful. Like the sun is so warm, the sun is so bright, the trees are all so colorful. Like the air is so fresh, and I would just walk around everywhere, like almost in a daze, just being like the world is amazing. And like, there's so much to see. There's so much that I haven't done because I was so busy hating myself. I was so busy like being depressed and being like feeling socially isolated, and therefore making myself socially isolated. Or even if I had lots of social interactions in a certain point of time, like, I would tell myself that they were less than what they were because I was so insecure. And I just wasted these amazing interactions I could have been having with people, these places I could have been going in the world, these things I could have been learning. I would just wake up ecstatic every single day. That lasted for about a month. And then I would say there was like a novelty to it that kind of wore off. For about another month, like I was just, again, fully in love with myself and with life, but not with the same novelty that I had at the start. And then at one point, about 2 months after the trip, I did have this 1 week where I started to feel flat again. And I tried to break it down, figure out what was going on. I was a little bit worried that, maybe this was just a temporary thing. I don't know, but I reflected on it for a bit and I realized I hadn't been getting much sleep. And this was a really interesting thing to me because I've always heard about studies or read studies about, about the link between getting good sleep, good routines of sleep, that sort of thing, and depression. And I'd tried these things before and it had never made any difference to me in any way. Such little difference that I felt confident to say maybe that's truth statistically, but it's not a truth for my individual data point. But I had this amazing realization that I'd never had a baseline happiness to return to by being healthy with my physical body. And for the first time in my life, I had some sort of baseline happiness that I could fall from by not looking after myself, by not getting enough sleep. I could fall into flatness or patterns of whatever else, thinking or not doing enough with my day and feeling guilty about it, whatever it would be, which was an amazing realization for me, because it was like, I can be not depressed for the rest of my life now. I just need to look after myself. Like, I just need to get sleep. I need to make sure that if I start to have negative self-talk, I make sure that I'm aware of it. Obviously not being like overly critical to myself or anything, but being aware of that's my self-talk, and like try and find a more positive self-talk. Those sorts of things, I had this realization that like I actually can look after myself now. Since then, I think I had one more flat week where again I hadn't been getting any sleep. And it's only been twice now. Actually the second time it might have been more like 2 or 3 weeks, and it was during a period when I like had a lot of work and I was just constantly not getting sleep. And so it's been twice in 9 months that I've had periods of flatness related to my sleep patterns. I can say with pretty high confidence, and otherwise like not even a single moment of flatness or depression or anything. So yeah, I think that's my story.
What made you want to try LSD and peyote?
So for me, I think I tried a few different drugs at this point, and I'd realized that I wanted to experience like these different ways of thinking and different ways of viewing the world. And in particular, after I tried LSD for the first time, I just had this amazing feeling of like, I did not know the mind could think in this way. I didn't know the mind could see these things and experience time slowing down and experience space in like a multi-dimensional way. Like, I didn't realize that was possible in the brain, and I just wanted to experience anything that there was to experience.
Sometimes people can have bad trips. Were you worried this might happen to you or potentially exacerbate the depression you already had?
I was not worried about that. I've had bad trips. My very first trip was actually really horrible in some ways and really amazing in others. But for the horrible part, I kind of had this delusion that my sister needed to go to the hospital. The way it came up was I could hear someone else started having a bad trip before me. They became convinced that like their fingers or limbs were falling off, and like they were absolutely convinced, and they were running around and screaming about it and screaming, there's blood everywhere, like someone, you have to call an ambulance. And I'm hearing these words and the like, the energy, and my brain is like picking up on that. And I started seeing I started seeing everyone around me like vomiting on each other. And then I looked at the floor, and it was like filling up with blood up to like my knee level. And I started hearing ambulance sirens in the background, and I somehow just got the delusion that my sister needed to go to the hospital. And I literally went to my brother. I was like, we have to call an ambulance right now. And he looked at me confused and went like, oh God, like, are you serious? Like, okay, like, I don't know what's going on, but he's getting out his phone. And then I started seeing how confused everyone looked around me. And I was like, oh, actually, wait, let's take a second. And then kind of realized you're having a delusion. But that was by far like, the most scared I'd ever felt, the most horrible. I had this like gut wrenching feeling that maybe we'd been meaning to look after her while our like parents were out. She was like 20 years old or so, like old enough, but still just this feeling that maybe we were meant to be looking after her, and like something had gone wrong, and that was gut wrenching. So I had bad trips. I wasn't worried about it going into new experiences for I think 2 reasons. One is I'd started to have enough experience, I think, with trips and delusions and hallucinations to kind of know how they felt, know how to deal with it, know to like either have someone present or like be really strong in knowing that you need to deal with everything after you've come back to a sense of reality. So I felt like I did have a lot of experience with it. And I think for a second thing, I did just have like a bit of a reckless personality. Like I was always very impulsive and not very scared of things in general. So yeah, I don't think it was a worry for me. And I think the last thing that I would say is like in my experiences, I don't know if this applies more generally, but in my experiences, my bad trips have not really had anything to do with my mental health whatsoever. They've just been crazy concocted situations.
Can you describe the difference in your outlook on life before and after the trip in just a few lines?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty easy for me to do. Before the trip, I hated myself. I hated everything about myself. I saw myself pretty much always having like a premature death, and I just didn't know when it would happen. And then after the trip, I just feel like I think the overwhelming feeling for me is that there's so much to do in the world. Like, I love myself, definitely. That's one thing. I love myself. I think I love my friends and my family at a level that I wasn't able to feel as much before because I had so much going on in myself. And I think I just love the world and like the idea that there's so much to do.
Was there anything that you would change about your experience?
No, I don't think so. I think in general, I tend to have the perspective that like every single thing I've been through, no matter how horrible at the time or no matter how anything turned out, has led me to kind of develop like the level of compassion and care I have in the world, develop the level of like resilience I have in the world, and led me to a point where now I am happy and healthy and in love with myself. And like if I tweaked any part of that, I don't know what learnings or growth I could lose. So
Do you think that LSD and peyote were required in order for you to begin the healing process?
I do think so. I think for one thing, it can allow you to view things in a very different way to how you can view things when you're not on those substances, and that's a scientific thing. I'm obviously not a neuroscientist, so I might get some of the particular wording wrong, but essentially my understanding is that it allows your brain to remove like the common neural networks or patterns of like thinking that it has, and like go down new pathways, make new pathways, and form like new patterns of thinking. And that might just be temporary during the duration of your trip, or in my case, I would say like it was something that I managed to rewire permanently. And I think like from a scientific and emotional perspective, that's not something that I would have been able to do otherwise. I can definitely give like a solid example if you want. So one example, an easy one, is like, if you would forgive other people for doing this, why don't you forgive yourself? When I tell myself that as a depressed person of 18 years sober, I tell it to myself, I try and believe it. But, sorry, I'm just gonna take a sip of water. Yeah, so when I tell that to myself as a sober person, I try and believe it. And I try and really take it on board, but it just doesn't land. It's like I don't care that somewhere deep down, I don't care that I would have forgiven someone else. I can't forgive myself because I hate myself and I hate that I did that. And just when you're on psychedelics, LSD and peyote, I'll use as the example, like well, for one thing, as I said, you can like redirect those patterns of thinking. So you don't have, like, you kind of have a clean slate for forming your new ways of thinking. And for a second thing, you do get a loss of ego. Like you lose like the sense of identity that you held before. So I pretty much was looking at it from like a third person perspective, as if Mitch was this other person here, and this was another person that Mitch has forgiven. So should this person forgive Mitch? And I'm like, as a third person, I'm like, yeah, they should. And that's not something that you can do when you're sober. Like, but when you're on LSD, like it's literally like you're seeing other people.
How did you manage to, as you said, rewired your thinking patterns? How did you go about making sure that that rewiring stayed in the long term? Because that would probably be the hardest part for a lot of people that have these epiphanies, is to actually bring it into their new norm.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me was having like reflection afterwards and deciding the ways that I wanted to integrate that into my life. And when I've heard of clinical studies with like psilocybin or LSD or other psychedelics, that does tend to be a strong theme, is that they have to have an integration back into their life to maintain the ways that they've developed their thinking. So I think the biggest moment would have been while I was actually still on the LSD, when I said to myself, no, you're going to make sure that you're not depressed. I think that was the biggest thing. And then after that, like telling people I had this great experience and I love myself now, like verbalizing that to my brother, to my friends, to whoever else, like saying that. And then reflecting on, like if I start to feel flat, why am I feeling flat? And why, why is that something that is just coming up now, let's say a month or 6 months in.
Why do you think LSD had such a profound effect on you specifically?
I think, well, I mean, first thing was because I was so severely depressed that I had something to work on. I think second thing, it was probably that I was coming more to a point in my life where I was ready to accept certain things about myself, and I hadn't got there yet, but I think like somewhere deep down I had like a bit of a readiness to start accepting myself. And then I think third thing is probably that like just as a person I'm very willing to like surrender myself to new experiences. So I think that got me in a position where I was happy to try LSD and peyote. And then on the trip, it puts me in a position where I can surrender myself to the experience and not fight against it, not end up in a bad trip generally, that sort of thing.
What have you learned about your depression through this experience that you weren't aware of before?
That's a good question. I think, I think the biggest one is that there was something that I loved about myself, which is that I'm a very caring person. Actually, I don't know if it's bad to backtrack to a different question now, but in terms of like integration into life and keeping a permanent way of thinking, going back to this core idea that I love, that I care about people, was really important. Like if I ever start to feel flat in any way now, and I'm saying flat lightly because I generally just don't feel flat anymore, but if I start to feel anything, I can like just go, I love that I care about people. I think that's really amazing, a trait of mine.
What did you try to do in the past to manage your depression? And why didn't that work for you?
I think the first thing that I tried to do was probably like try and like break myself out of it, like convince myself, like stop saying these things in your inner monologue. And I think that's just something that's so hard to do when you've like trained your brain to think certain patterns, and when you have certain triggers in the things around you, and when you don't have potentially the relationships and social environment that you want in your life. Like it's very hard to like correct your inner monologue, and even when you do correct it, it's hard for it to be completely genuine, and it's hard for you to not beat yourself up for even saying those things in the first place. So that's just an incredibly hard thing to do. Counseling, I think I've touched on, but I didn't have the best experiences with counselors, and I think probably different people would have. In fact, I think anyone could have a good experience with the right counselor, and I should have searched more, like tried more counselors, tried more things, but I just did not have the motivation. Like I had this dread of like having to go to someone, having to like bare my soul to them again, and then having them again make me feel like I was an attention seeker. And I just had that sense of dread that made me not want to go near it, which is something I think anyone who's feeling that should try their best to break past that way of thinking, because if you try enough counselors, you will find someone that works for you. But yeah.
Did you ever go on any medication for your depression?
I definitely considered. There's two reasons why I never did. I think the first one was like from a very young age, I was really wanting to see a counselor and try medication, that sort of thing. And when I talked to my parents about it at that time, I think they thought that they could handle it within the family. which I think was out of all the love in their heart, but probably not the best decision. And so at that age, I never had access to a counselor or a medication or anything like that. And then as time went on, I kind of did develop a fear of becoming dependent on medication, which since then I've been told, like, by friends who've tried it or other experts, that actually isn't a concern because the dosage is very well understood and that sort of thing. But for me, I had this kind of fear that I would become dependent on something for happiness and never be able to break past that.
What would you say to others considering experimenting with LSD or peyote?
First thing I would say is, like, do your research. And I mean that first chemically. Generally LSD is pretty safe unless you have heart conditions or things like that. Or if you have a predisposition to schizophrenia or something like that. That's what I've read up. Do your own research. Something like peyote may have more risks chemically, like if you mix it with certain other substances. So make sure you understand the chemical element. And then second thing I would say is read up on people's experiences. Read up on their bad experiences. Make sure you know what's possible to happen, because like you can have really bad experiences, and that's just like part of the whole psychedelic journey. Actually, and third thing I would say is like I would encourage people who are going into a psychedelic experience to surrender themselves to the experience. So this means be aware that you might have a bad trip. And if you do have a bad trip, don't think of it as like, I need to force my way out of this bad trip. Think of it as like, if possible, I'll try and like redirect my energies to happier things. If that's not possible, then that's part of this experience, and I'll come out of this knowing, what that feels like. And actually I find that I learn a lot about myself when I have bad experiences, because I find like, oh, these are the things that I thought about first. This is what I cared about. This is what I valued. So just surrender yourself to whatever you're going to experience and embrace it.
What would you say to others considering psychedelics to specifically treat depression?
I would say certainly make sure you're aware of like the possibility of a bad trip again. But I think beyond that, like if you've done your research and you know what you're getting yourself into, I think like there's an amazing potential in psychedelics to treat mental illness. Actually, I think the thing I would most say is don't expect to heal yourself straight away. Don't expect to heal yourself in the way that you specifically preconceived that it would happen. Like for me, it was completely by accident. And I think for a lot of people, they will have a healing journey that's different to the one they imagined. Just be okay with that. Be okay with, having to try it 10 times or, having to get there a different way to what you thought.
Do you think it's beneficial to go into it with no expectations at all and to see what happens, or to have the subconscious expectation that I'm doing a psychedelic to try and heal myself?
I think it can be either way. I think if you're going to go into it with, I think the wording was expectation of healing myself, I would try and redirect it to like an intention to explore this aspect of myself. So go in with an intention to like think about, by all means, think about beforehand, like the things that you want to consider and explore and work on. But don't expect that like you're going to be able to grab that out of a psychedelic experience. Just expect that you can go into there, explore those things and see where it takes you.
How do you view the self-harm you inflicted on yourself now that you're in a better headspace?
So I definitely had a journey with coming to acceptance with my self-harm. I think the biggest thing for me was when other people see it, and it's a very intimate thing. Like I often feel very judged, even if they're not presenting themselves that way. I had a lot of concerns about like if I meet a potential partner, and so I have a lot of scars. I have some on my arm along here, and then I have some up my arm here, and then all down my back and shoulder. So essentially, like I did have a lot of worries about, the way that people would perceive me because of that. And if I met a potential partner who in every other way could be the perfect match with me and love everything about me, and then they might see that and they might think like, oh, that, I don't know, is that person unstable? Are they fit to raise children? That sort of thing. And if I ever have kids, like how do I guide them through my experience in a way that's not going to give them any ideation, not going to give them any negative impacts, and just it was something that definitely worried me a lot. And I've definitely come on a journey to acceptance with it. I started hanging out with one group of friends in particular who were just the most welcoming people I'd ever met, and they inevitably, when you go swimming or something, had seen my scars. And the way that they dealt with it, I guess a lot of people are very shy about it, and which is, out of respect. They don't want to invade your personal, space, but you do get the impression from how shy they are that it's, that it's something that's bad, kind of. And this group of friends just looked at it and were like, "Oh, can you are you comfortable to talk about that? Is something that you can explain to us? Like, what is it? Is it just a tattoo? Is it just a picture? Is it something else?" And then like one or two of them were like, "Oh, it looks really cool on you, man. Like that's really cool." And like, as I was explaining it to them, they were just very, very willing to listen and hear, and did not make me feel weird about it at all. And from there, I kind of started to get this feeling of like, like this is something that is part of my journey. It's not something that I should necessarily pretend never happened, because it is part of all of the multitude of things that led me to my point of happiness and loving myself right now, and to growing in myself, and now like being comfortable around people, strangers, seeing my scars. To me, it's actually very freeing now to be like, I'm free of their judgment. Like they can think what they want, and the people who I will choose to hold dear in my life will be people who aren't going to judge that.
Outside of your experience with LSD and peyote and treating your depression, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, by all means. So I don't even know where to begin. I'll start with like some of the things I enjoy doing. I mean, first and foremost, probably being around people. As I've said, like a huge part of my identity from the experiences I've had is like caring for people. I love being out in nature. I like going, for walks or hikes, or like bouldering. I've been dipping my hands into recently. I love music. I muck around on guitar, trying to slowly and painfully teach myself how to sing, but it's a very slow, slow progress. I studied actuarial studies, which, if anyone hasn't heard of that, it's kind of like finance, like mix. Essentially, it's risk management. That's the crux of it. So finance mixed with a lot of statistics, like a lot of risk theory, and then also an understanding of like accounting, economics, that sort of thing. And now I work in data analytics, so like machine learning, AI, that kind of thing, which I love doing. I'm not the kind of person who wants to be doing it outside of work hours, especially since I've had my big, awakening, and there's so many things out in the world that I want to try, but certainly it keeps me very interested throughout the day.
What are you looking forward to?
What am I looking forward to? Short term, long term, any? Well, long term, I'm just looking forward to seeing so much of the world. Like, I really want to travel. I want to get lost, backpacking, and I think I want to spend like 5 years or something, just like experiencing different cultures. I think in South America is probably the one that I'm most interested in, like different ways of like living and experiencing life there. But yeah, also seeing, I don't know, anywhere touristy, anywhere in the world, honestly. Trying new things. I really want to try skydiving. I really want to try like sports I haven't tried, and just, yeah, anything I haven't tried. New drugs I haven't tried. I would love to go skydiving on LSD. I don't think that's going to fit within many safety protocols, so I probably won't be able to get that one, but that would be pretty cool. Yeah, no, just trying new things. One other thing, as I was coming out of my big trip, like after a lot of the confusion wore away, I started seeing a lot of things that were very nature oriented in a way that I've never experienced on LSD. So I saw like my Duna covers turned into like an army of chameleons, and like they were forming bigger chameleons and they were marching along, and they gave me a sense of unity. Like it felt symbolic sort of like unity. And the whole room's covered in snakes and lizards, like really just like, running along the floors and walls and ceilings, but in a really peaceful way. Like I think no matter who you are, no matter how scared of reptiles, like it just would have felt like nature. And then from talking to other people and their experiences on peyote, the kinds of questions they asked themselves, the kinds of naturey things they saw, the kind of symbolic feelings they inherently get, I'm pretty sure that the peyote was quite effective, even though I wrote it off too early on. And I think that actually was probably, I think that was probably the main compound that gave me the ability to process all those things about myself and beat my depression. I think it was mostly probably the peyote, and then the LSD definitely kicked it into gear. And the combination of the two, I think both had a lot of effects on me.
If you or someone you know is thinking about attempting to take their own life, please seek help. I've left a few resources in the description of this video, some websites you can visit with more information, and some phone numbers that you can call if you need to speak to someone. I think it's really important that we have these conversations and listen to their stories, so that we can better understand how people feel when they're isolated and they're at a low point in their life, and what we can do to support them at that time so that we don't lose any more people to suicide, which is sadly the leading cause of death between the ages of 15 and 44, which is an awful statistic. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider subscribing on Patreon. Otherwise, YouTube is great. And if you can be bothered posting it to Reddit somewhere, maybe our videos, that would be a great help as well for the channel. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you for the next video.